What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got my rest of season wide receiver rankings for you guys and my top 24 players at the position here in weeks 15 through 17. So before I get into today's video, make sure if you haven't already to go down and join the SFS family by hitting the subscribe button and turning that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video or go live for a fantasy Q&A. But let's not waste any more time here. Let's hit the intro and get into my top 24 players the rest of this season. All right, starting things off with my number 24 ranked player, I've got Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans here. And obviously Cooks missed week 14 due to a neck injury. But I think going forward, being the number one wide receiver on a Deshaun Watson-led football team, I think is very advantageous for Cooks here. And the ceiling is very high with some matchups as well. He's got the Colts, the Bengals, and the Titans, which are all teams that have been passed on as of late. So Cooks, a very explosive player, I think has, like I said, a very nice ceiling. And I think that the Deshaun Watson factor gives him a nice floor as well. So if we see Cooks have some big explosive plays and some bursts down the field, I think he'll have some very nice value and put up some solid fantasy numbers here these last 3 weeks. At my number 23 ranked spot, I've got Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. And obviously Cooper is one of the more talented wide receivers in the league and the number one option on that football team. But Cooper here has had some inconsistencies this season without Dak in the lineup. But in 3 straight games, he's had a touchdown. He's putting up some decent yards as well. So down the stretch here, I think he's got some nice upside. Week 16 in particular against the Eagles right now, which has a very struggling secondary. I think Cooper can have a really nice ceiling and be a very productive wideout. This one pains me right here, but Julio Jones is my wide receiver 22 for the rest of this season. And this is 100% to do with health, not production, not talent. Julio Jones, he deserves his respect, is 100% a top 3 to 5 guy in the league right now, even at age 32 almost here. So Julio Jones, his head coach Raheem Morris, just talked about potentially shutting him down for the season, which is why he is so low on my list. So obviously a huge concern there, but Julio, if he hits the field again, will be a wide receiver 1 level producer. But like I said, with the risk right now and the uncertainty about his future the rest of this season, he has to be this low on the list. My wide receiver 21 on a list filled with talented options and great fantasy lineup pieces is Robby Anderson of the Carolina Panthers. And this is a high-level option for teams right now, even being so low on the list. I mean, Anderson is Teddy Bridgewater's favorite target in that offense, and a guy right now who is seeing a ton of targets with DJ Moore off the field. And Robby Anderson has had a high ceiling his whole career. I mean, the guy can put up points in a flash and is very explosive down the field. And is also, like I said, seeing a lot of targets right now, so he's got a safe floor as well. And in particular, I like him again this week against Green Bay. I think he can put up some really nice numbers. And if Anderson finds the end zone again, I think he'll be a very productive lineup piece. At my wide receiver 20 spot, I've got Diontae Johnson. And as that Steelers football team starts to erode offensively, he's the last guy standing here in my top 24 of Pittsburgh wide receivers. And Diontae Johnson simply is just the highly targeted guy in that offense. He is Big Ben's favorite target and completely has his trust. I mean, he gets looks in the red zone, down the field, and underneath. So Diontae Johnson really does it all for that football team. I like the schedule here down the stretch. At Cincinnati, the Colts, and the Browns. I think those are all matchups he can have some really nice games in. And like I said, the targets give him a nice floor, and that upside is that he can have very good games in those matchups. I think possibly one of the most underrated players here is Brandin Aiyuk at my number 19 spot. And Aiyuk as a rookie is very impressive. They use him kind of like Deebo Samuel when he is not on the field, and that has been a lot this season. I mean, obviously Deebo, we might not see him again this year with that hamstring injury and the leg issues he's dealing with, but Aiyuk in 5 straight games in which he's been eligible has 75 plus receiving yards. He's had touchdowns in 3 of those games. With Dallas, Arizona, and the Seahawks left on the schedule, I think the rookie has some really nice promise here and some upside down the stretch. So Aiyuk is certainly a flex level consideration type player and a guy I think needs to be rostered in almost all leagues. Cooper Kupp comes in at my wide receiver 18 here. And for a guy in that Rams offense led by Jared Goff and Sean McVay, I think Cooper Kupp is an excellent fantasy option. Obviously in PPR, he's a bit more dependable. Not exactly the guy with the high ceiling we saw last year, but in those 12 personnel sets, he can still be dependable and productive in lineups. I mean, Cooper Kupp, I think, is Jared Goff's true favorite target. It's just a matter of playing time and scheme, but it's all a matter of getting the job done here for Cooper Kupp the rest of the season. The schedule is there as well. I think this guy can go out there and have a very strong finish to the 2020 campaign. Tyler Lockett comes in at my wide receiver 17 spot here, and this is a guy I would like to have higher on my list, but the consistency has been a huge issue for him this season. I mean, when he's on, and he has some massive days. I mean, he's had a 200-yard, 15-catch, 3-touchdown performance this year, and he's had a couple of those games when he just takes over and is the man in that offense. But the emergence of DK Metcalf has made him a bit more quiet in that system. Russ Wilson looks to him a bit less in that offense this year. But Lockett, 2 of his last 8 games, he's only had 16.5 fantasy points or more. So only a quarter of those games he's really putting up nice numbers. And the rest of them, he's all under 10 points in that half PPR scoring. So Lockett, a boom or bust play, a tremendous ceiling, but a not-so-great floor. I think he's still worth the start in a lot of leagues because of that upside, but he is a risky guy that could cost some teams here down the stretch. Mike Evans comes in at my wide receiver 16 spot after a very modest performance in Week 14 against the Vikings. And I know a lot of people want to panic on that Tampa offense, but that is not a bad team, or especially a bad offensive unit. So, and I've been saying this for a long time, Tampa has the best closing schedule of any team in the NFL for fantasy in terms of pass catchers. So they just need to get on track and hit on a couple of games here. Mike Evans, especially for a guy who's been scoring so many touchdowns this year, has a pretty darn good ceiling. So I wouldn't bail on Evans quite yet. I'd give him one more week. And if he can't produce against the Falcons, then I would start to worry. And then Chris Godwin, his teammate here at wide receiver 15, is another guy who moves down in my rankings this week, but I'm still not giving up hope for. I mean, obviously a bad game against the Vikings, but like I said, that schedule is great for the Tampa Bay pass catchers. And Atlanta twice and Detroit is really, really favorable. And I think that TB12 might not be the elite fantasy option he was once in his career, but he just needs to get these guys the ball. They can get the job done after the catch and score touchdowns. These guys are explosive. Mike Evans can make the contested catch down the field, but Chris Godwin is kind of that rack guy and the player that makes the explosion after the catch. But like I said, not giving up on these guys quite yet. The ceiling is there, and I think especially for Chris Godwin, so is that floor. These guys, I'd give one more week to produce, and if they don't, then it's reasonable to panic. Robert Woods is a guy here at my wide receiver 14 spot who I have been praising all season long. I have been absolutely all over his floor this season, and he is a guy who I really like because of that rushing value and what he does in that Rams system. But Robert Woods, a down week last week, but he was being covered by one of the game's best corners. Please, you guys, do not panic on Woods. The schedule here opens up a lot down the stretch. New York this week, then Seattle and Arizona. He can certainly produce in those games. They ran the football all over the Pats in Week 14 and really didn't have to throw. So Woods will see an uptick in volume this week. He will have more production, and this guy will be back to his usual self. Adam Thielen comes in at my wide receiver 13 spot, just outside of that wide receiver 1 cutoff. But Kirk Cousins, that offense, those guys are still productive. Adam Thielen had a down week against Tampa this week, but still being, I think, Kirk's favorite target in that offense, is a high-level fantasy producer, and we've been seeing him find the end zone at a high clip over the last quarter of the season or so here. So Adam Thielen, a guy I definitely still have hope for. I think he comes down slightly from where I had him at last week, but he is still a guy, like I said, that I'm very comfortable with in lineups. Into my wide receiver 1 territory type players, Terry McLaurin is my first guy up on the list, and he's coming off 2 back-to-back dud performances, but I don't think it's to any fault of his own. The matchups have been tough, and the Washington football team has been shuffling back and forth between Alex Smith and Dwayne Haskins like a deck of cards. So I think Terry starts to get back on track and find some consistency in that offense with whatever route they choose to go with this week. And Terry, I think the schedule lightens up here a bit as well. Seattle in Week 15 and then Carolina and Philadelphia, I think, are teams you can produce well against. So McLaurin, I think the ceiling is still there. He's been great all season long until the last couple weeks. I think he gets back on track and finishes off his 2020 campaign a very successful player. And then at my wide receiver 11, I've got Justin Jefferson, the rookie for the Minnesota Vikings. And Jefferson was quite quiet in that game against the Buccaneers in Week 14, but I think he gets back on track this week. against the Bears, who he had 8 for 135 yards against earlier on this season. And then the Saints, I think there is some opportunity there with Dalvin Cook having a tough game against the run. I think the Vikings look to pass a little bit more, and that should be a very interesting game with the rivalry that's formed between those two teams over the last few seasons in the playoffs. So, then Justin Jefferson to finish this year off. He's got the Lions, another great matchup. So, Jefferson, I've loved his ceiling all year long. I think it continues here the next 3 weeks, and I think he gets back on track and saves some teams. And then at wide receiver 10, I've got Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. And I think Thomas is the guy that posts that really safe floor that a lot of fantasy managers are looking for here in championship season. And that will give them some very safe, consistent play in their lineups here down the stretch. So MT in 3 of his last 4 games has 8 or more receptions. No touchdowns at this point in the season, but I think he will get in one of these last 3 weeks. So that'll give his lineup boost a lot as well. So MT, I love him the rest of the year. If you're in a PPR league, this guy should be in your lineups every week. And then at wide receiver 9, I've got Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. And Robinson has been a guy I've been all over since day one this fantasy season and loved picking up in draft season. A-Rob has been a guy for the longest time that was the only dependable option in that Chicago offense. But with the emergence of David Montgomery, Robinson has honestly become even better. And that passing game has become more efficient because they can run the football now in Chicago. And Robinson, like I said, from the get-go, was an extremely dependable start, had a great floor, but that ceiling is rising right now. The play-action game is there with David Montgomery's production, and he's just lightening up that secondary coverage load. So Robinson, 9 catches, 123 yards, and a touchdown against Houston in Week 14. With Minnesota, Jacksonville, and Green Bay left on the schedule, I think his ceiling and floor is excellent the rest of the way. Calvin Ridley lands at my wide receiver 8 spot here, and obviously with Julio Jones off the field, that's a big boost to his lineup value. He has been producing very well with him out of the lineup, and he had 8 grabs, 124 yards, and a touchdown with Julio not even suiting up and having no one to really lighten that secondary coverage on him. So with the schedule looking like Tampa Bay twice the rest of the year and Kansas City, I think those are some matchups the Falcons have to throw the football. And like I said, if Julio doesn't come back, this is going to be Matt Ryan's primary target the rest of the way. So Calvin Ridley's got a great ceiling. He's been playing really good football all year. This is definitely a career season for him, and the former first-round draft pick will not disappoint here down the stretch. DeAndre Hopkins is my wide receiver 7 for the rest of this season, and Hopkins has shown the ability to overcome that quarterback play and injury to Kyler Murray's throwing shoulder. He has been very consistent despite that and has back-to-back 15-point performances. And looking forward here, he's got the 49ers, who he tore up earlier this season, and the Philadelphia Eagles coming up, who have been struggling in the secondary as well. So Hopkins, I like his upside here. And like I said, despite that Kyler Murray injury, is showing a very safe floor. So Hopkins remains a top-level start and a very dependable wide receiver 1 the rest of this season. Stefon Diggs is my wide receiver 6 for the rest of this season. And Diggs has been a guy flashing an elite ceiling all season long and continued to back up his play this year with a strong 10-catch, 130-yard performance with a touchdown against the Steelers in Week 14. And going forward, Stefon Diggs has the Broncos, the Patriots, and the Dolphins. And with Josh Allen at quarterback, I really think the matchup is irrelevant here. Obviously, the Steelers are a very great unit defensively, but with Josh Allen's arm talent and the ability to get the ball down the field to Diggs, and Diggs' toe-tapping ability and polished route running himself, that's just a lethal combo. These guys have a great ceiling, like I've said many times, and I think these guys are going to get the job done the rest of the year. So Stefon Diggs, a must-start player, and one of the best ceilings in fantasy going forward. At number 5, I've got DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks, and obviously Metcalf is having a great season. 6 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown against the Jets last week. And going forward, he does have a tough schedule against the Washington football team, the Rams, and the 49ers, but Metcalf has been on a great pace all season long. He's shown us he does not need that many targets or receptions to get the job done, and his average yards per catch is off the charts. So DK Metcalf, a great ceiling, a guy I think continues to be an elite fantasy option here. Clearly one of the more dominant wideouts in the game, and for a guy who is just starting to scrape the surface of what he can do in the league, I think players and other teams need to watch out here going forward because he's going to finish this fantasy season off strong despite the tough matchups. And going forward into next year, his draft value is going to skyrocket, and this guy is going to be picked very, very early. A little bit of a flip of the script here from last week. I've got A.J. Brown overtaking DK Metcalf, his former teammate at Ole Miss, here on this week's ranking list. Brown comes in at my number 4 spot, and A.J. Brown is similar to DK Metcalf, a very physical wide receiver with a great ceiling. And what gives Brown the bump here is I think the schedule is a lot better for that Titans offense. A.J. Brown's got Detroit, Green Bay, and Houston, opposed to Washington, the Rams, and San Francisco for Metcalf. So I think Brown here, he's going to get it done down the stretch. And that team with Derrick Henry's elite rushing value sets up great play-action games. So Brown, like I said, great ceiling going forward. He's going to put up some massive fantasy outings here. And I think this guy is a true league winner down the stretch. Coming in at wide receiver 3 here, I've got Keenan Allen. And obviously Allen and Justin Herbert have been one of the best quarterback and wide receiver duos this season. And Allen has a super safe floor in fantasy and even has a really nice ceiling as well when he gets in the end zone and scores a touchdown. He's been showing us the ability to score from 10 plus yards out, which is very great for a guy who's not the best red zone threat. But Allen's route running is really great for Herbert's value, and he protects his quarterback, which in turn gives him a lot of targets. So Keenan Allen, a great option here down the stretch. Super safe in PPR formats, and a guy in standard leagues as well who is still a very dependable play. At wide receiver 2, I've got Tyreek Hill, and obviously Tyreek has been playing at an elite level all season long, and his ceiling is off the charts. I mean, with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, Andy Reid calling plays, you've got yourself a great situation offensively, and for a guy with the wheels of Tyreek Hill, he's going to put up some huge numbers. I mean, the one question mark we had about him was consistency, and he has completely blown expectations out of the water. I mean, on draft day, like I said, we were worried about if he was going to be able to week in and week out be a top-end starter because we've seen him had some duds this season, but he's only had one bust game this year at Buffalo where he had 3.5 points in half PPR scoring, but 14 touchdowns this season. Hill's had a great year, and he's been an elite-level fantasy producer. We can continue to trust him here down the stretch regardless of matchup. And then the absolute constant here on the channel has been Davante Adams at my wide receiver 1 ranking. I've had him at this spot since draft season, going all the way back into June and July. So Adams hasn't moved at all this year. He's been at number 1 this whole entire way. At Carolina, Tennessee, and Chicago, all matchups he can exploit. This guy's matchup proof and is a sit-and-forget type player. The things Adams has been doing with the ball lately is exceptional. I mean, Rodgers threw him a 12-yard back shoulder route, and he was just supposed to go out of bounds and toe drag, but Adams decided to go up, moss the corner, and have a 56-yard touchdown last week. So Tay's been on fire all season long. His touchdown count is off the charts, and for a guy who missed 3 or 4 games this year, Adams is the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy right now. So that just speaks to his production level. Him and A-Rod have been on another level, and this duo is not going to slow down here down the stretch. Those are my top 24 wide receivers for the rest of this fantasy football season. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and turn that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, all questions are welcome in the comment section below, and I'll get to as many of those as I can. So thank you so much, you guys. I'll see you later. Peace out.